So now we've got the book of Acts, and Acts is one of my favourite books in the Bible, and you'll kind of get to see why as we go through it. Not Romans, we're on Acts. So I want to give you an introduction first. It was written by Luke, who is a travelling companion of Paul, and it was written as a complete volume with the Gospel of Luke. And this is really a mere continuation of the same book that was intended to be read at the same time in the same way. And we've really put a big section down and made them two complete sections, but this would have naturally just been written and read as one complete volume of the same book. And it shows us really that the author's understanding, that the work of Jesus continued and happened in the same way through his Spirit in the book of Acts. The documentary style of facts and accounts and the work and the travel of Paul and the other disciples were continued in the same manner that the Gospel of Luke was written. That idea of pulling in together all of the factual information to be a great representation of what actually happened. So it's probably written in about 75 AD. Lots of the people who were involved in the stories, there would have been real eyewitnesses, that have been proper testimonies about what would have happened. So the accuracy of what was written in this is quite high, because there would have been lots of counterclaims if it wasn't right. But the fact that it was written like this and there was no counterclaims means that this is a high sort of accuracy book. And so Acts really is all about what Jesus continued to do and teach through the Holy Spirit. And so really, rather than it be called or often referred to as the Acts of the Apostles, this should rather be referred to as the Acts of the Holy Spirit. So I want to give you a little overview now. So chapter 1 is really the crux between Jesus' death and his resurrection and the promised Holy Spirit. And it's Jesus really teaching about the whole aspect of the kingdom, this new kingdom coming over all the world, and the promise of the Holy Spirit coming to fulfill the Old Testament, and the presence of God being in each and every person. That was going to be this new temple that was going to get filled. Bear in mind, they hadn't had Pentecost yet. They really didn't understand that. And that was all down to you and me becoming the new temple of God. And then he gave us this great challenge and this promise of the Holy Spirit coming, which is going to be key to the continued work of Jesus. And then in chapter 8, you're going to be my witness in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the ends of the earth, which really sums up the overview that is the whole of the book of Acts. So beyond that, you've got just Jesus's, he's resurrected in body, he's lifted into heaven, and he's glorified then as this king over all the earth in that moment where Jesus goes off to heaven and leaves us at the end of Acts 1. From there on, it's split into three sort of quite distinct sections. So you've got chapters 2 to 7 is all about bringing the good news to Jerusalem. Then in 8 to 12, you've got them going to Judea and Samaria. And then from 13 to 28, you've got out to all the nations, all the ends of the earth, and the continued work thereof. And that's sort of it in a nutshell. So the book really starts with Pentecost, and this is key to understanding how the rest of the book functions and the heart within it. And Pentecost is all about the gift of the Holy Spirit, the promised Spirit that Jesus says, and then the great miracle that happens because these men on Pentecost Sunday, they're not just speaking in tongues, they are preaching in languages that they didn't even know or understand about to all the people who were there, so that they could proclaim the truth about who Jesus Christ was. And they heard it in their own language, and they were so convinced of what was happening, they decided that they needed to follow Jesus Christ from that day on. And so often in Acts, you'll find that the gift of the Holy Spirit that happened in Acts came in a way that just brought about evangelism, that just brought about people coming to Jesus and seeing who Jesus was. Because remember, in Pentecost, it wasn't just about them having a great moment between them and God. It's they were so bubbling out with what this was. They needed to go and proclaim the good news of Jesus to all nations, which is exactly what Jesus said the Holy Spirit came to do. He came to just want to evangelize and witness to all the tribes of the earth. You've also got in the Pentecost story this great imagery of the fire of God, tongues of fire, resting on each and every person. Now in the Old Testament, this was the fire of God came in the holiest of holies, right in the central place. It was tied away from everybody else. Nobody could see it. Pentecost, they got it in an upper room. They went straight outside into the public, blown open for everybody to see. It was a great symbol of this new that was happening in the New Testament, this symbolism of God being with each and every person, not hidden away in a physical building, but actively burning on top and inside each and every individual. The presence of God with each individual, just in that imagery, sets up the whole rest of the story of the New Testament. The early sections of Acts also have the stories about what the early followers were doing as they started to understand this new Christian faith and how that shaped their lives, how they lived, how they interacted with each other. It said they gathered daily in the temple courts, they met house to house, they had communion, they formed communities, they supported each other, they spent a lot of time in prayer and praise. Then there's one notable story in that first part of Acts about the healing of the man by the gate beautiful and his subsequent evangelism that actually went praising, jumping and leaping and praising God. And that was really the launch pad from there for Christians to understand that the power of the Holy Spirit wasn't just to speak in another language, but actually it was to do great miracles that proclaimed who Jesus was. And that tradition then continued through the whole of Acts. This section in Jerusalem really ends where Stephen gets persecuted so badly, he gets stoned to death, and there's an uprising that really happened against the Christians, which pretty much drove most of that Christian early church out of Jerusalem. And that leads us on to the next part of the story. So 9 to 12, you've got Philip in Samaria, you've got Saul becoming Paul and his conversion, who met with Jesus and became a great advocate and really the biggest evangelist that the New Testament has. You've got Peter and Cornelius having a revelation about the impure and the pure and the gospel being for everyone, no matter if Jew or not. But it was a whole different way of Christianity that really brought together a church into a more unified powerhouse that actually became this big church in Antioch now, not in Jerusalem, but in Antioch. And it was the first time that the Christians were called Christians. And really that church in Antioch became the mission headquarters for the rest of church. We owe a great deal to them as that early base that was the missionary headquarters and was the growth and development of the gospel and the true church of Jesus Christ. Then 13 to 20, you've got the missionary journeys of Paul. He's going to the Roman Empire, Asia Minor, to Greece. But he's also got this feel that he really still needs to have a heart back to Israel and a mission to Israel. So you'll find that almost every place he goes to the Jewish synagogue first. His first charge to want to evangelize the people is to the Jews that met there. In chapter 15, you've got this big meeting of the Jerusalem Council, and they were still trying to say from back home that all the converts had to be Jews, and the apostles had this big disagreement, and it set up a totally new idea of membership in the Christian faith. That it wasn't based on ethnicity, about whether you were a Jew or whether you were following the Torah or very specific rules that were given. It was all about trust. It was all about faith. It was all about discipleship, a lifestyle that followed Jesus' teaching, no matter what culture you were in, what ethnicity background you were from. And that one aspect really set up a complete difference between the traditional religions and Christianity. And it started to present a problem to the Romans. They couldn't understand where to fit these Christians in because they weren't one distinct group. They weren't one distinct religion. It was just a total varied system that they couldn't really grab their hands around. So there's a lot of challenges between every time the Christians went into a situation, they challenged the values, they challenged what was happening, because the Christians were placing this huge value on it doesn't matter whether you're slave, whether you're free, whether you're rich, whether you're poor, whether you're a man, whether you're a woman, you're all equal before God. It doesn't matter whether you're a ruler, it doesn't matter whether you're nobody, it doesn't matter whether you were a Jew, it doesn't matter whether you were a Roman, it doesn't matter what you are. Before God, we are all equal. And within the church, they were all equal too. And that presented massive culture shift to every single status quo that was around at that time. So the Christians, they weren't any military threat. They were totally pacifist, but it was a total threat to the status quo, and that caused all sorts of problems. So Paul ends up in Rome, and you can read Paul's story from 20 to 28. And Paul got arrested in Jerusalem. He put on trial. There was nothing they could really do against him. But he ended up in prison for an awful lot of years. The great thing about that was he got to write loads of books, which we've now got in our New Testament. But Paul never quite ended up free. He ended up in Rome, but he passed that time writing his letters, and he ended actually up in Rome being able to speak to and hold meetings to, just having a massive influence on some really influential people in the center of the world that was Rome at that time. And actually that was part of God's plan for him to still progress the gospel through. So I want to give you my key verse, and I've already mentioned that, but my key verse is from Acts 1 verse 8, and it says, "You will receive power when the Holy Spirit comes on you, and you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and all the ends of the earth." Now that verse has a few real critical points in it. So the power that's there is this word dunamis, which is where we get the derivatives of the word dynamic and dynamite, and that's all about power and change. But here this verse also is about people worrying. The but in this verse is all about people worrying about God's timing. So what's going to happen next? And God just basically says, God's got all that worked out. You need to do this, but you are going to receive power from the Holy Spirit. And this is what you have to do. You need to go and be a witness. And the Holy Spirit's going to come on you to enable you to be a witness. It's this whole aspect that the Holy Spirit within you is going to enable you to be a witness. He's going to give you gifts. He's going to give you purpose. He's going to give you everything you need to do incredible things to tell the world all about Jesus. Okay, so lastly, the so now is all about be faithful to Jesus. Actually, the whole of the book of Acts is people who are faithful to God. It's all about people who shared the good news in their words and in their actions. It's about people who trusted in the power and the guidance of the Holy Spirit. And they used evangelism to build diverse communities that were all equal before God. So what should we do? Be faithful before God. Share good news in words and in action. We should trust the power and guidance of the Holy Spirit. And we should use evangelism to build diverse communities where all is equal before God. And that is the book of Acts.